The stagecoach door slammed shut, and Lydia Hale stood alone in the dirt, watching her future disappear in a cloud of dust. Behind her, the iron gates of the largest ranch in Montana Territory gleamed in the merciless afternoon sun. Inside those gates, the man who'd sent for her, who'd promised marriage, stability, a new life, had looked her over like livestock and found her wanting. Too plain, too poor. Not what he'd imagined when he'd written those letters back east. The rejection had been cold, public, and final. Now she had $17, a trunk full of worthless hope, and nowhere to go. The frontier didn't forgive mistakes like hers. And standing 30 yards away, leaning against a fence post with eyes that missed nothing, was a stranger who would either save her life or make it infinitely more complicated. If you're watching this story unfold, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The heat pressed down like a living thing. Lydia's dress clung to her back, the fabric dark with sweat, and her hands shook as she gripped the handle of her trunk. She'd dragged it from the stagecoach herself. The driver hadn't even bothered to help once he'd seen what was happening. Just tipped his hat, clicked his tongue at the horses, and left her standing there like a piece of abandoned furniture. The gates of the Whitmore estate stretched 15 feet high, wrought iron twisted into elaborate scrollwork that screamed money and power. Beyond them, the ranch house sprawled across the hillside, white painted wood and tall windows that caught the light like teeth. Beautiful. Unreachable now. Lydia turned her back on it. The town of Iron Gate sat a quarter-mile down the road, a collection of wooden buildings clustered together against the vastness of the territory. She could see the church steeple, the general store, the saloon with its faded sign. Somewhere in that town there had to be work, a boarding house, something. She wasn't going to stand here and cry about it. She'd taken 3 steps when the voice stopped her. "You planning to walk all the way?" Lydia spun. The man was still leaning against the fence, one boot propped on the lowest rail, arms crossed over his chest. He looked like he'd been carved out of the same rough timber as the fence itself, tall, weathered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that gave away nothing. Dust covered his clothes, and his hands bore the kind of scars that came from years of hard work. "I can manage," Lydia said. "Didn't ask if you could manage." He pushed off the fence and walked toward her with the loose-limbed ease of someone who spent most of his time on horseback. "Asked if you were planning to walk." "What business is it of yours?" He stopped a few feet away, studying her with eyes the color of slate. "None at all. But it's 4 miles to town, the sun's not getting any cooler, and that trunk looks like it weighs about as much as you do." Lydia lifted her chin. "I said I can manage." "Yeah, I heard you." He glanced past her toward the Whitmore gates, then back. "You're the one Whitmore sent for." It wasn't a question. Heat flooded Lydia's face, shame and anger twisted together so tightly she couldn't tell them apart. "I was." "But not anymore." "No." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he walked past her, bent down, and lifted her trunk like it weighed nothing at all. "Come on." "Wait, what are you doing?" "Saving you a long walk." He started toward a wagon hitched to 2 horses about 20 yards down the road. "You coming or not?" Lydia hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted, didn't know if climbing into that wagon would make things better or catastrophically worse. But the sun was brutal, the town was far, and her options had run out about the same time Maxwell Whitmore had closed his door in her face. She followed. The man loaded her trunk into the wagon bed without comment, then offered his hand to help her up onto the bench. His grip was calloused and strong, and he let go the second she was seated. "Name's Ethan Cole," he said, climbing up beside her. "Lydia Hale." "Figured." He clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward at an easy walk. Whole town knew Whitmore was bringing in a bride. Been the main topic of conversation for 2 weeks. How wonderful for them. Ethan glanced at her, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. "You always this prickly, or is today special?" "Today is very special." Lydia stared straight ahead, refusing to look at him. "It's the day I made a complete fool of myself in front of an entire territory. Whitmore's the fool, not you. He's rich, and I'm ruined." "I don't think that makes him the fool." Rich doesn't mean smart. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Whitmore's been married twice. First wife left him after 6 months. Second one died under circumstances nobody talks about too loud. You ask me, you got lucky. Lydia turned to stare at him. Lucky? Could have married him and figured out what kind of man he is later. Ethan's voice was flat, matter of fact. This way, you found out before you signed anything. But this way, I'm stranded in a town where I know no one with barely enough money to last a week. Yeah, there's that. They rode in silence for a while. The landscape rolled past, grassland stretching to the mountains, broken by stands of pine and the occasional homestead. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Lydia had grown up in Philadelphia, where buildings pressed close together and the streets smelled like coal smoke and horses. This was different, bigger, emptier, more honest, maybe. There a boarding house in Iron Gate? She asked finally. Mrs. Henderson's place, 3 streets past the church. Is it expensive? Depends on what you call expensive. Ethan glanced at her. You got work lined up? No. Skills? Lydia bristled. I can read and write. I can sew. I can cook and clean and manage a household. Can you handle livestock? I've never tried. Mend fences? No. Chop wood? Haul water? Slaughter chickens? No. Lydia's hands clenched in her lap. Is there a point to this interrogation? Just trying to figure out what you're planning to do. Ethan's tone wasn't cruel, just practical. Town's small. Most women here are already wives or widows. Not a lot of work for a single woman unless you're willing to take in washing or work at the saloon. The implication hung in the air. Lydia's stomach turned. I'm not working at a saloon. Didn't say you should, just laying out the options. Well, I'll find something else. Probably. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, almost reluctantly, I've got work if you want it. Lydia turned sharply. What kind of work? The kind I just asked if you could do. Livestock, fences, cooking, cleaning, all of it. He kept his eyes forward. I run a ranch about 8 miles north of town. It's just me and the place is falling apart faster than I can fix it. I could use help. You're offering me a job. Yeah. Why? Because I need help and you need work. Ethan said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. You can stay in the cabin. There's a second room that's not being used. I'll pay you fair wages, and you can leave whenever you want. No obligations. It was too easy, too convenient. Lydia had learned the hard way that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. What's the catch? No catch. Men don't just offer stranded women jobs and housing out of kindness. Ethan's jaw tightened. Some men don't. I do. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were hard. You want the job or not? I'm not going to beg you to take it. Lydia studied him. He didn't look like a liar. He looked tired, worn down, like a man who'd been carrying too much weight for too long. And there was something in the set of his shoulders that reminded her of herself. The kind of stubborn refusal to break that came from surviving things that should have destroyed you. If I say yes, she said slowly, and you turn out to be lying about any of this, I'll make you regret it. Fair enough. I mean it. I believe you. Lydia took a breath. It was a risk, but then again, so was walking into town with $17 and no prospects. At least this risk came with a roof and wages. All right, I'll take the job. Ethan nodded once. Good. He turned the wagon north, away from Iron Gate, and they rode out into the open country where the mountains rose blue and distant against the sky. The ranch appeared as the sun started its slow descent toward the horizon. It wasn't much. A cabin built from rough-hewn logs, a barn that listed slightly to one side, a corral with half the fence posts missing. Beyond that stretched pasture land where a dozen cattle grazed, looking half wild and underfed. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. Here we are? Lydia climbed down, taking in the scene. It was worse than she'd imagined. The cabin's roof sagged in one corner, and the windows were so grimy she couldn't see through them. Weeds grew tall around the foundation, and the front steps looked like they might collapse under her weight. It's not much, Ethan admitted, hauling her trunk down from the wagon. But it's solid. Roof doesn't leak. Much. Much? I'll fix it. Lydia walked up the steps carefully, testing each one. The door swung open with a creak that suggested the hinges hadn't been oiled in years. Inside, the cabin was dim and cluttered. One main room with a fireplace, a rough table, and a kitchen area that consisted of a stove and some shelves. 2 doors led off the main room, both closed. That one's yours, Ethan said, pointing to the door on the left. There's a bed and a chest. Not much else. Lydia opened the door. The room was small but clean, cleaner than the main room at least. A narrow bed stood against one wall, covered with a faded quilt. A wooden chest sat at the foot of the bed, and a single window looked out over the pasture. It was the plainest room she'd ever seen. It was also hers. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan set her trunk down just inside the door. You hungry? Starving. I'll make something. He headed back to the main room, and Lydia heard him moving around, opening cupboards, clanking pots. She sank down onto the bed, her legs suddenly weak. She'd left Philadelphia 6 weeks ago with a head full of dreams and a heart full of hope. The letters from Maxwell Whitmore had been warm, charming, full of promises about a new life in the West. He'd described his ranch, his plans for the future, the kind of partnership they could build together. He'd made it sound like an adventure. The reality had been his housekeeper opening the door, looking her up and down, and then fetching Whitmore from his study. He'd stood in the doorway, tall and impeccably dressed, and his face had gone cold the moment he saw her. You're not what I expected, he'd said. And that had been that. Lydia pressed her palms against her eyes, refusing to cry. She was done crying. She'd cried on the train west, cried in the stagecoach, cried herself to sleep in shabby hotel rooms along the way. Tears didn't change anything. They didn't make you stronger or smarter or more prepared for the next disaster. Action did. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked back into the main room. Ethan was at the stove, frying something that smelled like salt pork and onions. He glanced up as she entered. Sit. It'll be ready in a minute. Lydia sat at the table. Can I help? Not tonight. You've had a long day. That was an understatement. Lydia watched him work. He moved with the easy competence of someone who'd been cooking for himself for a long time. No wasted motion, no hesitation. When he set a plate in front of her a few minutes later, the food was simple but good. Salt pork, fried potatoes, bread that was only slightly stale. Thank you, she said. Ethan sat across from her with his own plate. We'll start early tomorrow, sunrise. There's a lot to do. What kind of work? Depends on the day. Right now, the fences are in bad shape. Cattle keep wandering off. Barn roof needs patching. And I'm behind on just about everything else. He cut into his meat. You said you can cook? Yes. Good. I'm tired of my own cooking. Lydia almost smiled. I'll do what I can. They ate in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, just quiet. The kind of quiet that came from 2 people who didn't know each other yet and weren't sure what to say. When they finished, Lydia started to clear the plates, but Ethan waved her off. Go get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be hard. She didn't argue. Her body ached from the long journey, and exhaustion pulled at her like a weight. She retreated to her room, changed into her nightgown, and lay down on the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Ethan moving around, washing dishes, banking the fire, his footsteps crossing the floor. Then his door closed, and the cabin fell silent. Lydia stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She'd come west looking for a new life. She'd imagined herself as a rancher's wife, building something lasting and good. Instead, she'd been rejected before she'd even unpacked her trunk. But maybe that didn't have to be the end of the story. Maybe it could be the beginning of a different one. Sunrise came early and bright. Lydia woke to the sound of Ethan moving around in the main room, and by the time she'd dressed and emerged, he already had coffee brewing on the stove. Morning, he said, not looking up from the pan where he was frying eggs. Morning. Lydia's voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat. What do you need me to do? Eat first, then we'll see. They ate quickly. Eggs, more of that half-stale bread, coffee so strong it made Lydia's eyes water. Then Ethan led her outside. The ranch looked even rougher in the clear morning light. The barn sagged ominously, the corral fence was held together more by hope than nails, and the cattle were scattered across the pasture like they'd forgotten they were supposed to stay in one place. "We're going to start with the fences," Ethan said. "I've got posts and wire in the barn. You ever use a hammer?" "A few times." "Good enough." He headed toward the barn, and Lydia followed. They spent the morning hauling posts and wire out to the pasture. Ethan worked with the kind of relentless efficiency that came from years of practice, digging post holes and setting poles while Lydia did her best to keep up. The work was brutal. Her hands blistered within an hour, her back screamed in protest, and the sun beat down without mercy. But she didn't complain. Ethan didn't talk much while they worked. He explained what needed to be done, showed her how to hold the post steady while he tamped down the dirt, and corrected her when she got something wrong. His corrections weren't cruel, just blunt, direct. By midday, Lydia's dress was soaked with sweat and her arms trembled with exhaustion. Ethan called a break, and they sat in the shade of a scrub pine, passing a canteen back and forth. "You're tougher than I thought," Ethan said. Lydia looked at him. "What did you think?" "Thought you'd quit by now. Most people would." "I don't quit." "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." He took a long drink from the canteen, then handed it to her. "Why'd you come west? Really?" Lydia considered lying, but there didn't seem to be much point. "I needed a fresh start. Philadelphia was—" She trailed off, trying to find the right words. "Suffocating. I worked as a governess for a family there, and when the children grew up, they didn't need me anymore. I had no family of my own, no prospects. When I saw Mr. Whitmore's advertisement, it seemed like a way out." "So you risked everything on a stranger's promise?" "Yes." "That took guts. Or stupidity. Maybe both." Ethan stood, brushing dirt off his pants. "Come on, let's get a few more posts in before the heat gets worse." They worked until late afternoon, when the sun finally started its descent and the temperature dropped from unbearable to merely oppressive. By the time they trudged back to the cabin, Lydia's hands were bloody. Her dress was ruined, and every muscle in her body screamed. "Go clean up," Ethan said. "I'll start dinner." Lydia washed at the basin in her room, scrubbing the dirt and blood from her hands. Her reflection in the small mirror looked haggard, sunburned face, hair coming loose from its pins, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but alive. When she returned to the main room, Ethan had a pot of stew simmering on the stove. It smelled like heaven. "Sit," he said. Lydia sat. Ethan ladled stew into a bowl and set it in front of her, then served himself. They ate in the same companionable silence as the night before, too tired for conversation. "You did good today," Ethan said finally. "Thank you. Tomorrow will be worse." Lydia almost laughed. "I believe you." And she did. But for the first time since the stagecoach had dumped her at the Whitmore gates, she felt something that wasn't fear or shame. She felt capable. The days blurred together after that. Lydia woke at dawn, worked until her body gave out, ate whatever Ethan put in front of her, and collapsed into bed too exhausted to dream. They mended fences, patched the barn roof, hauled water, and wrestled half-wild cattle back into the pasture. Slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the ranch started to look less like a disaster and more like a working operation. Ethan remained a mystery. He didn't talk about his past, didn't ask about hers beyond that first conversation, and kept a careful distance between them. He was never unkind, but he was never warm either, just present, steady. Lydia found herself watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, the way he moved, economical, precise, the way his face softened slightly when one of the cattle finally cooperated, the scars on his hands and the way he flexed his fingers sometimes like they hurt. He'd been alone out here for a long time. She could see it in the way he'd let the place fall apart, in the way he seemed surprised when she actually showed up to work each morning, in the way he flinched slightly whenever she got too close. 3 weeks after she'd arrived, they took the wagon into Iron Gate for supplies. Ethan needed nails and wire, and Lydia needed fabric to make new work dresses. The ones she'd brought from Philadelphia were in tatters. The town was busy. People moved along the wooden sidewalks. Horses stood hitched to rails, and the general store bustled with activity. Lydia followed Ethan inside, acutely aware of the way conversations stopped when they entered. Eyes turned toward them. Whispers started. The woman behind the counter, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, looked Lydia up and down. "Well, I heard you were working out at the coal place." "Yes, ma'am," Lydia said. "Interesting arrangement." There was judgment in those words. Lydia lifted her chin. "Mister, Cole needed help with his ranch. I needed work." "I'm sure." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "What can I get you?" Lydia gave her the list of supplies she needed. The woman gathered them with exaggerated slowness, all while shooting meaningful glances at the other customers. The message was clear: scandal, impropriety, a single woman living alone with a single man. Lydia paid for her purchases and walked out, her face burning. Ethan was waiting by the wagon, his own supplies already loaded. He took one look at her face and frowned. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Lydia, the woman in there thinks I'm your mistress." The word came out bitter. "And she wanted to make sure I knew everyone else in town thinks the same thing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're idiots." "Maybe, but they're not wrong to wonder. An unmarried woman living alone with an unmarried man, it looks exactly like what they think it looks like. Then they can think what they want." Ethan climbed onto the wagon bench. "We know the truth. That's what matters." Lydia climbed up beside him. "Does it? Because the truth won't stop them from ruining my reputation. What's left of it, anyway. Your reputation isn't their business. In a town this small, everything is everyone's business." Ethan didn't answer. He just clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. They rode in silence most of the way back. But as they turned onto the path that led to the ranch, Ethan finally spoke. "If it bothers you that much, you can leave. I'll give you enough money to get somewhere bigger, somewhere people don't care what you do." Lydia stared at him. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to do whatever makes sense for you." "That's not an answer." Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. "I'm not good at this," he said quietly. "People, conversation, figuring out what to say. But I'll tell you straight, I don't want you to leave. You work harder than anyone I've ever met, and this place is better with you here. But if staying means you're miserable because the town won't leave you alone, then I don't want that either." It was the most words he'd strung together since she'd met him. Lydia sat very still, processing. "I'm not leaving," she said finally. "You sure?" "Yes." She looked at the cabin, the barn, the pasture beyond. 3 weeks ago, this place had looked like a wreck. Now the fences stood straight, the barn roof no longer leaked, and the cattle stayed where they were supposed to. She'd done that. Her hands, her work, her refusal to quit. "This is mine now, too. I'm not letting a bunch of gossips drive me away from it." Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Relief, maybe, or something close to it. "All right, then." He climbed down and started unloading supplies. Lydia helped him, and together they carried everything inside. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind, Lydia realized something that should have frightened her, but didn't. She'd stopped thinking of this place as temporary. Somewhere along the way, between the blisters and the back-breaking work, and the quiet meals across the table from a man who barely spoke, this ranch had become home. And she'd do whatever it took to keep it. The first frost came in late September, turning the grass silver and making the morning air sharp enough to hurt. Lydia woke to find ice crystals on the inside of her window, delicate patterns that caught the pale dawn light. She dressed quickly, layering on every piece of clothing she owned, and stepped into the main room to find Ethan already stoking the fire. "Winter comes early here," he said without looking up. "We've got maybe 6 weeks to get ready." "Ready for what?" "Everything." He straightened, wiping soot from his hands. "Hay needs cutting and storing. Firewood needs chopping. A lot of it. The cabin needs insulating, and the cattle need to be moved closer to the barn. If we're not prepared, we won't make it through." The casual way he said it, "we won't make it through," sent a chill down Lydia's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Has anyone ever not made it through? Yeah. The family that had this place before me. Found them in the spring, frozen in their beds. Ethan pulled on his coat. They ran out of firewood in February. Thought they could stretch what they had. Lydia's stomach turned. That's horrible. That's Montana. He headed for the door. Come on, we're burning daylight. They spent the next weeks in a frantic race against the weather. Ethan showed Lydia how to swing an axe properly, how to split logs along the grain, how to stack wood so it would dry and stay dry through the snow. Her hands, already calloused from fence work, developed new layers of toughness. Her arms grew stronger. Her aim improved until she could sink the axe blade exactly where she wanted it more often than not. Ethan worked beside her, saying little but always present. When she struggled with a particularly stubborn log, he'd step in without being asked, split it in 2 clean strokes, then step back and let her continue. He never made her feel weak for needing help, never acted like her effort was worth less than his. One afternoon, as they hauled armloads of split wood to the pile behind the cabin, Lydia paused to catch her breath. The woodpile had grown impressively, nearly as tall as she was, and twice as wide. "Is this enough?" she asked. Ethan surveyed their work. "It's a start. We need triple this." "Triple?" "Winter here lasts 6 months. We'll burn through this in 2 if we're not careful." He dumped his load and turned back toward the chopping area. "And we can't afford not to be careful." Lydia followed, her legs aching. "Did you do all this alone last year?" "Yeah." "How?" "Barely." Ethan picked up the axe. "Lost a lot of weight. Ran out of food in March. Had to shoot one of the cattle just to have meat." The image of Ethan alone here, starving through the winter, doing everything himself, it made something twist in Lydia's chest. "Why didn't you hire help before now?" "Couldn't afford it. Ranch barely brings in enough to cover supplies." He swung the axe and a log split cleanly. "This year's different. You've helped me get twice as much done. We're actually ahead for once." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. Lydia felt warmth spread through her chest despite the cold. "Good. Then let's stay ahead." They worked until the sun dropped below the mountains and the temperature plummeted. That night, Lydia cooked a stew thick with vegetables from the garden they'd managed to coax into production and the last of the salt pork. Ethan ate 3 bowls and actually smiled when she offered him a 4th. "You're a good cook," he said. "Better than you, anyway." "That's not saying much." He pushed his empty bowl away. "But yeah, better than me." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters Ethan had installed the week before. Lydia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Ethan looked wary. "Depends on what it is." "Why are you doing this? The ranch, I mean. It's killing you, working this hard for so little return." He was quiet for a long time. Lydia thought he might not answer at all. Then, finally, "It's mine. First thing I've ever owned that actually matters. I'm not giving it up just because it's hard." "Where were you before?" "Everywhere, nowhere." Ethan stared into the fire. "Worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas for 10 years. Saved every penny I could. When I had enough, I bought this place. It was cheap because the previous owners died here, and nobody wanted land with that kind of history. But I didn't care. It was mine. No family? Not anymore. Parents died when I was 12. Grew up in an orphanage in St. Louis until I was old enough to run. Never looked back." The flatness in his voice told Lydia everything he wasn't saying. She recognized it, that careful blankness people developed when talking about pain too old and deep to show. She had her own version of it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be. It made me who I am." He stood, stretching. "I'm turning in. We've got an early start tomorrow." "Ethan?" He paused in the doorway to his room. "Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would." His expression softened slightly. "You earned it. I just opened the door." He disappeared into his room, and Lydia sat alone by the fire, thinking about orphanages and cattle drives and the kind of loneliness that drove a man to buy cursed land just to have something of his own. She understood that loneliness. She'd lived with it her whole life. Maybe that's why this worked. 2 people who'd learned not to need anyone finding out they could survive better together. The next morning brought the town. Lydia was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see 3 riders coming up the path, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the kind of clothes that announced money and status. The woman rode side saddle on a beautiful chestnut mare, her riding habit deep green and perfectly tailored. One of the men was older, gray-haired and stern-faced. The other was younger, handsome in a polished way that immediately set Lydia on edge. Ethan emerged from the barn, saw the riders, and his whole body went tense. "Whitmore," he said quietly. Lydia's heart lurched. Maxwell Whitmore, the man who'd rejected her. And now he was here on Ethan's property, with companions who looked equally judgmental. The riders stopped in front of the cabin. Whitmore dismounted with practiced ease, his boots hitting the dirt without a sound. Up close, he was even more imposing than Lydia remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it weren't so cold. "Cole," Whitmore said, nodding at Ethan. "I heard you'd taken on help. Thought I'd come see for myself." "My business isn't your concern, Maxwell. Everything in this territory is my concern." Whitmore's gaze shifted to Lydia and his expression turned contemptuous. "Miss Hale, I see you've found employment." Lydia lifted her chin, refusing to show how much his presence rattled her. "Mr. Whitmore, how fortunate that Mr. Cole was willing to take you in after our unfortunate misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," Lydia said coolly. "You made your feelings perfectly clear." The woman on the horse laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. "How bold! I like that." She dismounted with the help of the older man, then walked toward Lydia with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "I'm Catherine Harrow. My father owns the mercantile in town. And this is Mr. Pearson, who manages Mr. Whitmore's ranch." She gestured to the gray-haired man. "We're here on a social call." "Social call?" Ethan repeated flatly. "You've never made a social call in your life, Maxwell." Whitmore smiled. "I've been neglecting my neighbors. Thought it was time to remedy that." His gaze swept over the property, the repaired fences, the patched barn, the neat stacks of firewood. "You've made improvements." "We've been working." "So I see." Whitmore turned back to Lydia. "Miss Hale, I wonder if I might have a word with you, privately." "No," Ethan said immediately. "I wasn't asking you, Cole. And I wasn't asking your permission." Ethan moved to stand beside Lydia, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Anything you have to say to her, you can say in front of me." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Protective, aren't you? One might wonder about the nature of your arrangement here." "One might mind their own damn business." Catherine laughed again. "Goodness, such hostility. We really are just here to talk, Mr. Cole. No need to be uncivilized about it." "Then talk and leave." Whitmore sighed, like Ethan was being unreasonable. "Very well. Miss Hale, I wanted to apologize for my behavior when you arrived. I was hasty in my judgment. After some reflection, I believe I may have been too harsh." Lydia stared at him. "You're apologizing?" "Yes, for humiliating me in front of your staff and leaving me stranded. I've already said as much, haven't I?" Whitmore's tone turned sharp, then smoothed out again. "What I'm trying to say is that I'm willing to reconsider. If you're interested in resuming our original arrangement, I would be happy to—" "No." The word came out harder than Lydia intended. Whitmore blinked, clearly not expecting such a swift rejection. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no." Lydia's hands clenched in her skirt. "You made it very clear that I wasn't what you wanted. I'm not interested in being your consolation prize now that you've had time to reconsider." Catherine's eyebrows rose. "My, she does have spirit." "Miss Hale," Whitmore said, his voice taking on a patronizing edge, "I understand you might be upset, but let's be practical. What kind of future do you have here? Working as a ranch hand for a man who can barely keep his own operation afloat? You could have comfort, security, a position in society. All you have to do is be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," Lydia said, "reasonably sure that I'd rather work myself to death out here than spend one day as your wife." Whitmore's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "That's her decision to make," Ethan said. "Now you've had your say. Time to go." "Cole, you don't know what you're interfering with. I know exactly what I'm interfering with. You're trying to bully a woman into doing what you want because you're used to getting your way. Well, she said no. That's the end of it. For a moment, Lydia thought Whitmore might actually strike Ethan. His hand flexed, his jaw clenched, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. But then Pearson cleared his throat, a subtle warning, and Whitmore stepped back. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "Both of you." "I doubt it," Ethan replied. Whitmore turned on his heel and mounted his horse in one smooth motion. Catherine followed, looking amused by the whole encounter. Pearson was the last to mount, and as he did, he looked at Ethan with something that might have been pity. "Watch yourself, Cole," he said quietly. "Maxwell doesn't forget things like this." Then they were gone, riding back toward town in a cloud of dust. Lydia realized she was shaking. Ethan touched her elbow, brief, grounding. "You all right?" "I don't know." Lydia watched the riders disappear over the hill. "What did he mean? You'll regret this." "Maxwell's used to people doing what he wants. When they don't, he makes things difficult." Ethan's voice was grim. "But we'll deal with it. Come on, we've got work to do." They went back to cutting hay, but the encounter had left a sour taste in Lydia's mouth. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming, something worse than gossip and disapproving looks. That night, she barely slept. The trouble started 3 days later. Ethan came back from checking the cattle with his face like stone. "We're missing 6 head." Lydia looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "Missing?" "Gone. Fence was cut on the north pasture. They didn't just wander off. Someone drove them out." "Who would do that?" Ethan's expression answered the question. Lydia's stomach dropped. "Whitmore." "Can't prove it, but yeah, probably." "Can we get them back?" "If I knew where they were, maybe. But they could be anywhere by now. Sold, slaughtered, who knows?" Ethan paced the length of the cabin. 6 head. That's half our breeding stock for next year." "What can we do?" "Not much. Go into town, report it to the sheriff, and hope he actually investigates. Which he won't, because Whitmore donates generously to his re-election campaign." Lydia wiped flour from her hands. "So we just let it go? Unless you've got a better idea." She didn't. But the injustice of it, the sheer arrogance of Whitmore thinking he could steal from them without consequence, made her want to scream. They rode into Iron Gate the next morning. The sheriff's office was a small building near the saloon, and Sheriff Tom Dawson was a heavy-set man with a florid face and the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Missing cattle," he repeated when Ethan explained. "And you think Maxwell Whitmore took them?" "I think someone cut my fence and drove them off. Whitmore had motive." Dawson leaned back in his chair, which creaked alarmingly. "Now, Ethan, that's a serious accusation. You got any proof?" "The cut fence. Fresh tracks leading toward Whitmore's property." "Tracks could be from anyone, and fences get cut all the time. Drifters, wild animals, could be anything." "It was deliberate." "Maybe so. But without proof, there's nothing I can do." Dawson's tone made it clear he had no intention of looking for proof. "My advice, keep better watch on your stock. Lock your gates." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "So you're not even going to investigate? I'll make a note of it. If your cattle turn up, I'll let you know." "They're not going to turn up, and you know it." Dawson's expression hardened. "I said I'll make a note. That's all I can do. Now, if you don't mind, I've got other business to attend to." Ethan stood there for a moment, rigid with barely controlled anger. Then he turned and walked out. Lydia hurried after him. Outside, he stopped beside the wagon, breathing hard. "Useless. The whole damn system is useless. Ethan, Whitmore owns this town. The sheriff, the merchants, probably half the ranchers in the territory. He can do whatever he wants, and no one will stop him." Lydia touched his arm. "Then we'll stop him." "How? We've got no money, no influence, no... We've got each other, and we've got this." She gestured at the town around them. "Maybe Whitmore owns the sheriff, but he doesn't own everyone. There have to be other people who are tired of him running things." Ethan looked at her like she'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. "You want to organize some kind of resistance against Maxwell Whitmore? I want to find people who'll stand with us. There's a difference between being powerful and being invincible. He's pretty close to invincible." So were a lot of people until someone decided to fight back. Lydia surprised herself with her own conviction. I didn't come all this way and work this hard just to let some arrogant rancher push us around. Did you? Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression, the stone-faced resignation cracking to reveal something harder underneath. Determination. No, he said. I didn't. Then let's figure out how to fight him. They started at the general store. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Patterson, Lydia had learned, still looked at her with thinly veiled disdain, but she answered Lydia's questions about other ranchers in the area. Small operations, people who might be struggling like Ethan, people who might have their own grievances with Whitmore. Over the next week, Ethan visited 3 of them. The first 2 wanted nothing to do with any kind of conflict. They had families to protect, businesses to run, and crossing Whitmore seemed like suicide. But the third, a grizzled rancher named Dutch McKenna, who ran a small spread west of town, listened to Ethan's story and nodded slowly. Whitmore's been squeezing me for years, Dutch said. Keeps trying to buy my land for half what it's worth. When I won't sell, things start going wrong. Fences break, water gets diverted, supplies go missing. He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. I've been too stubborn to leave and too old to fight back. But if you're starting something, count me in. One ally. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Then, 2 weeks after the cattle disappeared, Lydia found the fire. She'd gone to the barn early to feed the horses and found smoke seeping through the cracks in the door. Her heart stopped. She ran back to the cabin, screaming for Ethan, and together they fought the blaze with buckets of water from the well. It took an hour to put it out, and by the time they were done, half the barn's interior was charred black, and the hay they'd stored for winter was destroyed. Lydia stood in the ruins, soot-streaked and shaking, staring at the devastation. He's trying to break us, she said quietly. Ethan kicked at a burned beam. He's doing a good job. We can't let him win. We might not have a choice. Ethan's voice was hollow. No hay means the cattle won't make it through winter. No cattle means no income. No income means we lose the ranch. Then we find more hay. We buy it, borrow it, steal it if we have to. With what money? Lydia didn't have an answer for that. They stood there in the ash and smoke, 2 people who'd fought so hard to build something being systematically destroyed by someone who couldn't stand to see them succeed. But as Lydia looked at Ethan, at the exhaustion in his face, the defeat trying to take root, she felt something ignite in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Something harder, more dangerous. Fury. We're not done, she said. I don't care what it takes. We're not done. Ethan met her eyes. For a moment she thought he might argue. Then he nodded once, sharp and certain. No, we're not. They spent the rest of the day salvaging what they could from the barn. That night, Lydia sat at the table working numbers while Ethan stared into the fire. They had enough money saved to buy hay, but it would drain their reserves completely. They'd have nothing left for emergencies, nothing for winter supplies, nothing at all. We'll make it work, Lydia said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Ethan didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Lydia wanted to offer comfort, reassurance, something, but she had nothing to give except her own stubborn refusal to surrender, and that felt painfully inadequate. I should have let you go, Ethan said finally, when Whitmore offered to take you back. You'd be safe right now. Comfortable. I'd be miserable. Better than this. No. Lydia set down her pencil. This is hard. It might get harder. But at least it's real. At least I'm building something that matters instead of playing the part of someone's decorative wife. You call this building? We're being destroyed. Not yet, we're not. Lydia stood, walked around the table, and sat down across from him. Listen to me. I've spent my whole life being pushed around by people who had more power than I did. Employers who treated me like furniture. Families who discarded me when I was no longer useful. And then Maxwell Whitmore, who looked at me like I was livestock that didn't meet his standards. I'm done with that. I'm done being the person things happen to. Out here, with you, I get to fight back. Even if we lose, at least I got to fight. Mon. Ethan looked at her with something close to wonder. You really mean that? Every word. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm glad you're here, even with everything falling apart. I'm glad it's not just me. The admission hung in the air between them, raw, unguarded. Lydia felt her throat tighten. Me too. They sat there in the firelight, two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives by accident, discovering they didn't want to stumble out again. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, and that would have to be enough. The knock came 3 days later, just after dawn. Lydia was already up, feeding the chickens they'd managed to keep alive through sheer determination, when she heard the sound of a wagon rattling up the path. She tensed, expecting more trouble, but the man who climbed down was older, weathered, with kind eyes and dirt under his fingernails. Dutch McKenna, he said, tipping his hat. Brought you something. Ethan emerged from the barn, wary. Dutch, what are you doing here? Heard about your barn. Dutch walked to the back of his wagon and pulled back a tarp, revealing bales of hay stacked high. Can't let good people starve their cattle because some bastard thinks he owns the territory. This should get you through to spring. Lydia stared. We can't pay you for this. Didn't ask you to. Dutch started unloading bales. Consider it an investment. You two are the first people in years who've had the spine to stand up to Whitmore. Figure that's worth supporting. Ethan moved to help him, and together they transferred the hay to what remained of the barn. When the wagon was empty, Dutch refused coffee, refused payment, refused everything except a handshake and a promise. You need anything else? You let me know, he said. And when the time comes to actually do something about Maxwell Whitmore, you let me know that too. He left before Lydia could properly thank him, disappearing back down the path in his empty wagon. She turned to Ethan, who was staring at the hay like he couldn't quite believe it was real. There are good people here, she said quietly. Yeah. Ethan's voice was rough. Yeah, there are. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. They weren't alone. Someone believed in what they were doing enough to risk Whitmore's anger. That had to count for something. 2 days later, a woman showed up at the door. She was small, thin, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much. Her name was Margaret Yates, and she ran a boarding house on the edge of Iron Gate. I heard what happened, she said without preamble. The barn fire. The missing cattle. Whitmore's been doing this for years. Finds someone he doesn't like and squeezes until they break. My husband stood up to him once, refused to sell our property when Maxwell wanted to expand. 3 months later, my husband was dead. Kicked by a horse, they said. But that horse had been gentle as a lamb for 10 years. Lydia felt ice slide down her spine. You think Whitmore killed him? I think convenient accidents happen around people who cross Maxwell Whitmore. Margaret's hands twisted in her apron. I can't fight him. I'm just one woman trying to keep a roof over my head. But I can help you. I hear things at the boarding house. Travelers talk. Ranch hands gossip. If Whitmore's planning something, I'll know about it, and I'll tell you. Why? Ethan asked. Why risk it? Because someone should. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. Because my Henry deserved better than to die for the crime of saying no to a powerful man. Because maybe if enough of us stop being afraid, things might actually change. She left as quickly as she'd come, but her words lingered. Lydia felt something shift inside her, the realization that this wasn't just about their ranch anymore. This was about everyone Whitmore had ever hurt, everyone he'd ever crushed, everyone who'd been too afraid or too isolated to fight back. This was bigger than she'd understood. Over the next weeks, more people came. A blacksmith who'd lost his shop when Whitmore called in a loan early. A widow whose water rights had mysteriously transferred to Whitmore's property after her husband died. A young rancher who'd been run out of the territory after refusing to sell his land. Each one brought a story of loss and anger, and each one offered what help they could. They didn't have money or influence, but they had information. They had skills. They had determination. And slowly, carefully, they started to build something that looked like resistance. The first snow fell in mid-October, light and dry, dusting the ground like powdered sugar. Lydia stood on the porch watching it fall, wrapped in a blanket Ethan had given her when the temperature dropped. He came out to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Winter's here," he said. "Are we ready?" "As ready as we're going to be." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what happens next." "Next?" "With Whitmore, with all of this." Ethan gestured vaguely at the ranch, the mountains, everything. "We can't just keep reacting to whatever he does. We need a plan." "What kind of plan?" "That's the problem. I don't know." Frustration edged into his voice. "I'm good at ranching. I can work from sunrise to dark without complaining. But strategy? Politics? That's not me." "Then we'll figure it out together." Lydia pulled the blanket tighter. "We've got people now. Dutch, Margaret, the others. Maybe one of them has an idea." "Maybe." Ethan didn't sound convinced. They stood there as the snow fell, both thinking about the same impossible question. How do you fight someone who controls everything? The answer came from an unexpected source. Catherine Harrow appeared at the ranch 2 weeks later, alone this time, riding her chestnut mare with the kind of casual elegance that made Lydia want to throw something. She dismounted before Ethan could tell her to leave, tied her horse to the fence, and walked straight up to the porch. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Both of you." "We're not interested in anything Whitmore sent you to say," Lydia replied. "Maxwell didn't send me. He doesn't know I'm here." Catherine glanced around as if checking for witnesses. "Can we go inside? This isn't a conversation I want to have where anyone might overhear." Ethan and Lydia exchanged looks. Finally, Ethan nodded. They went inside and Catherine took off her gloves with precise, deliberate movements. "I'll be direct," she said. "Maxwell Whitmore is planning to destroy you completely. The barn fire was just the beginning. He's got men watching this place, documenting everything you do. He's going to accuse you of stealing his cattle, the ones that actually went missing, and he's got witnesses ready to swear they saw you do it. When that happens, the sheriff will have no choice but to arrest you both." Lydia's blood ran cold. "He's framing us." "Yes, and it will work, because Maxwell owns the judge, the jury, and everyone else who matters in this territory." Catherine sat down at the table without being invited. "You'll be convicted. Your property will be seized to pay fines you can't afford, and Maxwell will buy this ranch for pennies. He's done it before. He'll do it again." "Why are you telling us this?" Ethan demanded. Catherine's expression was hard to read. "Because I'm tired of watching him destroy people for the crime of existing in his way. Because my father's business depends on Maxwell's patronage, which means I have to smile and nod while he does terrible things. Because—" She paused, something flickering across her face. "Because I used to be engaged to a man who stood up to Maxwell. He died in a riding accident 6 months later, and I've always wondered." The silence that followed was heavy. Lydia felt sick. "What do we do?" "Leave. Tonight, if possible. Take whatever you can carry and go somewhere Maxwell's influence doesn't reach." "California, maybe. Oregon." "No." Ethan's voice was flat. "I'm not running." "Then you're a fool." Catherine stood. "Maxwell always wins. Always. The only people who survive are the ones smart enough to get out of his way." "There has to be another option," Lydia said. "Some way to fight back." "There isn't. I've watched a dozen people try. They all lost." Catherine pulled her gloves back on. "I've told you what's coming. What you do with that information is your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you." She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, and Lydia watched through the window as she rode away, an elegant figure disappearing into the gray afternoon. "She's right," Lydia said quietly. "If Whitmore frames us, we're finished. So we make sure he can't." "How?" Ethan paced the length of the cabin. "I don't know yet, but running isn't an option. This ranch is all I have. I'm not handing it to Maxwell Whitmore without a fight. Even if fighting means losing everything? Especially then." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "You can go if you want. Take the money we've saved and get somewhere safe. I won't blame you." Lydia almost laughed. "You really think I'd leave now? After everything? It would be smarter." "I'm not interested in being smart. I'm interested in winning." She moved to stand in front of him. "We're in this together, remember? That means we find a way through it together." Something in Ethan's expression cracked open. Relief, gratitude, something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. All right, together. They spent that night planning. If Whitmore was going to accuse them of stealing cattle, they needed proof they hadn't. Witnesses who could verify their whereabouts, documentation of their own herd, anything that might cast doubt on Whitmore's story. But the more they planned, the more obvious it became that evidence wouldn't matter. In a system where Whitmore controlled the judge and jury, truth was irrelevant. They needed something bigger. The idea came to Lydia in the early hours of the morning when exhaustion had worn down her usual caution. What if we go public? Ethan looked up from the list they'd been making. What? What if we tell everyone what Whitmore's doing? Not just our friends, everyone. The whole territory. Make it impossible for him to act in secret. How would we even do that? There's a territorial assembly meeting in 3 weeks. Representatives from every county, merchants, ranchers, everyone who matters. Lydia's mind raced. If we could get in front of them, tell our story, show them what Whitmore's been doing, they wouldn't listen. Half of them probably owe Whitmore favors. Maybe, but the other half might care. And if enough people hear the truth, Whitmore can't just make us disappear quietly. Lydia leaned forward. It's risky. It might not work, but it's better than waiting for him to destroy us. Ethan was quiet, thinking. We'd need evidence, real evidence, not just our word against his. Then we find it. And if we can't, then we try anyway. It was desperate and probably doomed, but it was something. Lydia saw the moment Ethan made his decision. His shoulders straightened, his jaw set, and that stubborn determination she'd come to rely on settled over his features. All right, he said, let's do it. They started gathering evidence the next day. Margaret provided sworn statements from 3 people who'd been driven out of the territory by Whitmore's tactics. Dutch documented the times his fences had been cut and his water diverted. The blacksmith produced records showing how Whitmore had called in his loan 6 months early, violating their original agreement. Each piece was small, but together they started to form a pattern. Meanwhile, Whitmore's presence grew more oppressive. His men were everywhere, watching the ranch, following them into town, making sure everyone knew that crossing Whitmore came with consequences. The sheriff started dropping by with increasing frequency, asking pointed questions about their cattle, their finances, their relationship. Just doing my job, Dawson said each time, but his eyes said something different. The pressure was working. Lydia could feel it wearing on Ethan, could see it in the way his shoulders stayed tense even when he was trying to relax, in the way he checked the doors and windows twice every night before bed. She felt it too, the constant awareness of being watched, the knowledge that any mistake could be twisted into evidence against them. But they kept working. 3 days before the assembly meeting, Whitmore made his move. Lydia was in town buying supplies when she saw the crowd gathering near the sheriff's office. She pushed through to see Whitmore standing on the steps, dressed in expensive clothes and speaking in the kind of reasonable tone that made everything he said sound like obvious truth. I've tried to be patient, he was saying. I've tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. But the evidence is clear. Ethan Cole and the woman he's harboring have been systematically stealing cattle from ranches across the territory, including my own. I have witnesses, I have documentation, and I'm calling on Sheriff Dawson to do his duty and arrest them both. The crowd murmured. Lydia felt eyes turning toward her, some sympathetic, most uncertain, a few openly hostile. She wanted to shout that it was a lie, wanted to defend Ethan, but her voice seemed stuck in her throat. Then someone else spoke. That's interesting, Maxwell, because I've got documentation too. Dutch McKenna pushed through the crowd, holding a stack of papers. Documentation showing that the cattle you claim were stolen matched the descriptions of cattle that wandered onto my property after someone cut Cole's fence. Cattle I returned to Cole 2 weeks ago, which means either your cattle and his cattle are identical or you're lying. Whitmore's expression darkened. That proves nothing. Maybe not, but this might. Margaret Yates stepped forward, her voice stronger than Lydia had ever heard it. I've got signed statements from 6 people who've lost property or business to you in the last 5 years, Maxwell. Each one following the same pattern. You wanted something, they refused, and suddenly terrible things started happening to them. At what point does coincidence become conspiracy? Lies, Whitmore snapped. Bitter lies from bitter people. Then let's have a trial, Dutch said. A real one, not one you control. Let's bring all this evidence in front of the Territorial Assembly and let them decide who's telling the truth. The crowd stirred. Whitmore looked furious, but he was trapped. Refusing would make him look guilty, but agreeing meant losing control of the narrative. Fine, he said coldly. If you want to embarrass yourselves in front of the entire territory, be my guests. But when the assembly sees the truth, that Cole is nothing but a thief and that woman is his accomplice, you'll all regret defending them. He stormed off, and the crowd began to disperse. Lydia stood there, shaking, as Dutch and Margaret approached. You all right? Dutch asked. I think so. Lydia's voice came out unsteady. Thank you, both of you. If you hadn't spoken up, we're not letting him win, Margaret said firmly. Not this time. Lydia rode back to the ranch in a daze. When she told Ethan what had happened, he went very still. So it's really happening, he said. A public trial at the assembly. Yes. And if we lose, then we lose everything. Lydia met his eyes. But if we win, Whitmore loses his grip on this territory. People will know what he is. They won't be as afraid anymore. That's a big if. I know. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her like that, deliberate and gentle. His palm was rough against hers, calloused from years of hard work, and warm. Whatever happens, he said, I'm glad you were here. I'm glad I wasn't alone for this. Lydia squeezed his hand. Me too. They stood there in the fading light, holding on to each other and the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, they could win this. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. They rehearsed what they would say, organized their evidence, and tried to anticipate every argument Whitmore might make. Their small coalition grew. More people came forward with stories, with support, with the kind of quiet courage that came from watching someone else be brave first. On the morning of the assembly, Lydia dressed in her best remaining dress, the one she'd worn when she first arrived in Montana, now mended and cleaned and still hopelessly plain. Ethan put on the suit he'd worn to buy the ranch, the one that was slightly too tight across the shoulders and smelled like mothballs. They looked at each other and almost laughed at how unsuited they were for this kind of fight. We look ridiculous, Lydia said. Yeah, but we're here. Ethan offered his arm. Ready? No, but let's go anyway. The assembly hall was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, all eyes turning as Lydia and Ethan entered. Whitmore was already there, seated at a table near the front with his lawyer and several well-dressed associates. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who knew he'd already won. Catherine Harrow sat in the third row, her face carefully neutral. When Lydia caught her eye, Catherine gave the tiniest nod. Encouragement or warning, Lydia couldn't tell. The territorial representative called the assembly to order. We're here to address accusations brought by Maxwell Whitmore against Ethan Cole and Lydia Hale. Mr. Whitmore, you may present your case. Whitmore stood. He was good at this. His voice carried authority. His arguments sounded reasonable. His evidence looked damning. He presented bills of sale for cattle that matched the descriptions of those that had gone missing. He called witnesses who swore they'd seen suspicious activity near Cole's ranch. He painted a picture of a desperate man turning to theft, aided by a woman of questionable character who'd latched onto him after being rejected elsewhere. It was devastating. When Whitmore finished, the murmurs from the crowd were mostly sympathetic to him. Lydia felt her hope crumbling. How could they fight this? Whitmore had thought of everything. Then it was their turn. Ethan stood. He wasn't eloquent like Whitmore, didn't have the polish or the practice. His voice shook slightly when he started talking, and his hands clenched the edge of the table. I'm not good at speeches, he said. I'm a rancher. I work with my hands, not my words. But I know the difference between right and wrong, and what Maxwell Whitmore is doing is wrong. He laid out their evidence. The The cut fences, the barn fire, the systematic harassment. He called Dutch to testify about the cattle. Margaret spoke about the pattern of destruction that followed anyone who crossed Whitmore. The blacksmith produced his loan documents. One by one, their witnesses stepped forward, and slowly, the mood in the room began to shift. "Mr. Whitmore claims I'm a thief," Ethan said, his voice growing stronger. "But the truth is, he's the one who's been stealing land, stealing livelihoods, stealing hope from anyone who won't bend to his will. And he's gotten away with it because we've all been too afraid to stand together." He gestured at the people who'd come to support them. "But we're not afraid anymore. We're here, in front of all of you, asking for justice. Real justice, not the kind that can be bought." He sat down, and for a moment, the hall was silent. Then the representative spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, do you have a response?" Whitmore stood slowly. His confidence had slipped slightly, but he recovered quickly. "This is nothing but a coordinated attack by people who resent my success. Every piece of so-called evidence can be explained. As for the barn fire and the cut fences, I had nothing to do with those tragedies. Perhaps Mr. Cole should look closer to home for the source of his problems." The implication was clear. Maybe Ethan had done it himself, for sympathy. Lydia felt rage flash through her. She stood before she could think better of it. "That's a lie," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "And you know it. You've been trying to destroy us from the moment I refused to marry you, not because we did anything wrong, but because you can't stand being told no." Whitmore's face went red. "You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I?" Lydia stepped forward. "You wanted a decorative wife, someone to show off and control. When I didn't meet your standards, you threw me away. But when I didn't break, when I found a life without you, you couldn't tolerate it, because people like you need everyone else to be beneath you. You need us to fail so you can feel powerful." The crowd was riveted. Whitmore looked like he wanted to strike her. "But we didn't fail," Lydia continued. "We built something. We survived. And that scared you, didn't it? Because if we can stand up to you, anyone can." "Enough," Whitmore snapped. "This is absurd. I demand—" "You demand." Dutch stood now, his voice hard. "You've demanded enough, Maxwell. For years you've demanded our land, our obedience, our silence. Well, we're done giving it to you." Others started standing. Margaret, the blacksmith, 2 ranchers Lydia didn't even know. One by one they rose, a silent show of solidarity that filled the hall. Even some of Whitmore's usual supporters looked uncertain now. The representative banged his gavel. "Order! Everyone sit down!" When the room quieted, he looked between Whitmore and Ethan. "I've heard enough. This assembly will vote on whether the accusations against Mr. Cole and Miss Hale have merit, and whether further investigation into Mr. Whitmore's business practices is warranted." Whitmore's face went pale. This wasn't supposed to—" But it was too late. The vote was called. And when the hands went up, more voted against Whitmore than for him. Not by much. Not by enough to feel like a real victory. But enough that the representative declared the accusations against Ethan and Lydia to be unfounded. And enough that an official investigation into Whitmore's practices would be opened. It wasn't everything. But it was something. The assembly adjourned. People crowded around them, some congratulating, some warning that this wasn't over, some just staring like they couldn't believe what had happened. Lydia searched the crowd for Whitmore and found him near the exit, his face a mask of cold fury. He caught her eye and mouthed 2 words. "This isn't finished." Then he was gone, and Lydia was left standing in a hall full of people who'd just witnessed something impossible. They'd fought Maxwell Whitmore and lived to tell about it. They didn't speak on the ride back to the ranch. The wagon rattled over frozen ground, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie. Lydia kept replaying the assembly in her mind. The moment the vote was called, the look on Whitmore's face, the impossible reality that they'd actually won something. But Whitmore's parting words echoed louder than the victory. "This isn't finished." Ethan's hands were tight on the reins, his jaw set in that way that meant he was thinking hard and not liking his conclusions. When they finally pulled up to the cabin, he sat for a moment without moving. "We should celebrate," Lydia said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Should we? We stood up to him. We won the vote. We embarrassed him in public. That's not the same as winning." Ethan climbed down from the wagon, his movements stiff. Men like Maxwell Whitmore don't forget things like that. They don't forgive them either. Lydia knew he was right, but the truth of it settled over her like a weight. They'd crossed a line today. Before, Whitmore had been trying to break them quietly, through accidents and pressure and legal maneuvering. Now it was personal. Now he'd been humiliated in front of the entire territorial assembly, his carefully constructed reputation as a respectable rancher damaged by their accusations. What would a man like that do when respectability failed him? She didn't want to know, but she suspected they'd find out soon enough. That night, Ethan checked the doors and windows 3 times. He loaded his rifle and set it by the door, within easy reach. Lydia watched him move through the cabin, his shoulders tense, and felt fear coil in her stomach. "Do you think he'll come here?" she asked. "I don't know, but I'm not taking chances." He paused by the window, staring out into the darkness. "You should sleep in shifts. I'll take first watch." "Ethan, I'm not arguing about this." His voice was harder than she'd heard it in weeks. "One of us needs to stay awake. Just in case." Lydia wanted to protest, wanted to say he was being paranoid, but she couldn't. Not when she felt the same cold certainty that something bad was coming. "All right, wake me in 4 hours." She lay down on her bed fully clothed, but sleep was impossible. Every sound made her tense. The wind rattling the shutters, the creak of the cabin settling, the distant howl of a coyote. She heard Ethan moving around the main room, his footsteps crossing and recrossing the floor. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went to join him. He was sitting at the table, the rifle across his lap, staring at the door like he could see through it into the darkness beyond. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without looking at her. "No." Lydia sat down across from him. "This is going to be our life now, isn't it? Waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Maybe. Until the investigation finishes and they actually do something about Whitmore. And if they don't?" Ethan finally looked at her. "Then we keep fighting. What else can we do?" The simple truth of it made Lydia's chest ache. They were trapped now, too committed to back down, too vulnerable to feel safe. The victory at the assembly had bought them time and allies, but it had also painted targets on their backs. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For pushing us into this. If I hadn't suggested going to the assembly, if I'd just kept quiet, then we'd be waiting for Whitmore to destroy us instead of fighting back." Ethan leaned forward. "Don't apologize for having a spine, Lydia. That's the only reason we're still here." She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel proud of what they'd done instead of terrified of what came next. But fear had sharp teeth, and it was sinking them deep. They sat together in the lamplight, 2 people who'd stumbled into something bigger and more dangerous than either had imagined, trying to convince themselves they could survive it. The attack came 2 nights later. Lydia woke to the smell of smoke and Ethan shouting her name. She stumbled out of bed, disoriented, and saw orange light flickering through the gaps in the shutters. Fire. The barn was on fire again, or maybe the house this time. She couldn't tell through the smoke already seeping through the walls. She grabbed her coat and ran into the main room. Ethan was at the door, rifle in hand, peering out into the darkness. "Is it the barn?" she asked. "No, they set the haystack on fire, the one Dutch gave us." His voice was flat with rage. "They're out there. I saw them riding off." "How many?" 3, maybe 4. Hard to tell in the dark. He looked at her. "Get water. We have to put it out before it spreads." They fought the blaze for an hour, hauling water from the well in buckets that felt impossibly small against the wall of flame consuming their winter hay. The heat was brutal, the smoke choking, and by the time they finally got it under control, Lydia's lungs burned and her hands were blistered raw. What remained of the haystack was a smoldering ruin. Weeks of work, Dutch's generous gift, their only hope of getting the cattle through winter, all of it gone. Ethan stood staring at the destruction, his face black with soot, his eyes reflecting the dying flames. He looked like a man who'd reached the end of something important. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. We could leave, pack up tonight, and be in the next territory by morning." Lydia turned to look at him. "Is that what you want?" "I want to stop watching everything I've built burn." His voice cracked. "I I want to sleep without wondering if I'll wake up to find the house on fire. I want... He stopped, swallowed hard. I don't know what I want anymore. Lydia had never seen him like this. Not defeated exactly, but worn down to something raw and bleeding. She wanted to offer comfort, to say something that would make it better, but there was nothing. They were losing. Slowly, systematically, Whitmore was destroying them, and all their courage and determination couldn't stop it. I'm not leaving, she said finally, but if you want to, I'll understand. Ethan laughed, a bitter sound without humor. You think I could leave you here alone to face this? What kind of man do you think I am? I think you're exhausted. I think you've been fighting alone for so long that you forgot what it feels like to have someone fight with you. And I think you're scared. Yeah, I'm terrified. He met her eyes, but not of Whitmore. I'm scared that no matter how hard we fight, it won't be enough. That everything we've done will amount to nothing, and in the end, he'll win anyway because that's what men like him do. The honesty of it cut through Lydia's own fear. She stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Then we make it mean something. Even if we lose, we make sure everyone knows what we were fighting for. That's not enough. It has to be, because it's all we've got. They stood there in the smoking ruins of their hope, two people who'd found each other by accident, discovering they didn't know how to let go. Finally, Ethan reached out and pulled her into an embrace, desperate, tight, like he was trying to hold on to something solid in a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. Lydia wrapped her arms around him and held on just as hard. When dawn came, they rode to Dutch's ranch. He took one look at their faces and knew. Whitmore's men hit you again. Burn the hay, Ethan said. All of it. Dutch's expression turned thunderous. That son of a... He caught himself, glanced at Lydia. When? Last night. 3 or 4 riders. We couldn't see faces. But you know who sent them. Yeah, we know. Ethan slumped in his saddle. I don't know what to do anymore, Dutch. We won at the assembly, we've got the investigation started, but it doesn't matter. He's still coming after us, and we can't fight back. Can't prove it was his men. Can't protect everything all the time. Dutch was quiet, thinking. Then he said, You need more than hay. You need witnesses. People who'll stand watch, document what's happening, make it impossible for Whitmore to act without being seen. Who's going to do that? Everyone's afraid of him. Not everyone. Dutch walked to his barn and came back with a rifle. I'll do it, and I know at least 5 other ranchers who will too. We'll take turns keeping watch on your place, round the clock until this is over. Dutch, you can't... Can't I? You stood up for all of us at that assembly, Cole. You said what we've all been too scared to say for years. You think we're going to let Whitmore destroy you for it? Dutch's voice was firm. We're in this now, all of us, and we're going to see it through. Lydia felt something loosen in her chest. They weren't alone. They'd never been alone, not really. They'd just been too scared to see it. Over the next days, Dutch made good on his promise. Ranchers started showing up at the property in shifts, armed and watchful. They built a small camp at the edge of the pasture where they could keep eyes on the approaches to the ranch. Some brought supplies. Others brought information about Whitmore's movements, gathered from servants and ranch hands who were quietly sympathetic to their cause. The presence of witnesses changed everything. Whitmore's men still circled the property, but they couldn't act without being seen. The harassment continued in smaller ways. Supplies went missing from town, orders got delayed, prices mysteriously increased. But the overt attacks stopped. For the first time in weeks, Lydia slept through the night. But the investigation into Whitmore's practices moved with agonizing slowness. The territorial investigator was a thin man named Carlson who asked endless questions, documented everything meticulously, and revealed nothing about his conclusions. He interviewed Whitmore. He interviewed Ethan and Lydia. He spoke with their witnesses and Whitmore's supporters and seemed determined to hear every possible perspective before making any judgment. How long is this going to take? Lydia asked him after yet another interview. Carlson adjusted his spectacles. As long as it needs to, Miss Hale. These are serious accusations against a prominent citizen. I need to be thorough. While you're being thorough, he's still destroying people's lives. If the evidence supports that conclusion, I will make appropriate recommendations. His voice was maddeningly calm, but I will not be rushed into a judgment that might be overturned on appeal. This needs to be done right. Lydia wanted to scream that they didn't have time for right. They needed fast, but she knew it wouldn't help. Carlson was the kind of man who believed in process above all else, and nothing she said would change that. Meanwhile, winter deepened. Snow fell in earnest, covering the ground in white and making travel difficult. The cattle huddled near the barn, lean and hungry without enough hay to sustain them. Ethan slaughtered two of the weakest, not wanting to waste resources on animals that wouldn't survive anyway. And the loss showed in the tight lines around his mouth. They were surviving, but barely. One bitter afternoon in late November, Catherine Harrow appeared at the ranch again. This time she looked different. Her usual polish was gone, replaced by something harder and more urgent. She dismounted quickly and walked straight to where Lydia was splitting firewood. "You need to leave," Catherine said without preamble. "Tonight. Maybe tomorrow at the latest." Lydia set down the axe. "What happened?" "The investigation is wrapping up. Carlson's preparing his report." Catherine's voice was low, urgent. "My father saw an early draft. It's not going to be what you hoped." Lydia's stomach dropped. "He's siding with Whitmore? He's calling the whole thing inconclusive, says there's evidence of wrongdoing on both sides, recommends that the assembly drop all charges and let everyone move on." Catherine's hands clenched. "Which means Whitmore walks away clean, and you've accomplished nothing except making him angrier. That's not... We had witnesses, we had documentation. And Whitmore had better lawyers who picked apart every piece of evidence, who found alternative explanations for everything, who made you look like bitter troublemakers instead of victims." Catherine's expression was pained. "I'm sorry. I know you were counting on this." Lydia felt the words like physical blows. All of it, the assembly, the testimony, the weeks of investigation, all of it for nothing. Whitmore would win because the system was built to protect men like him, and no amount of truth or courage could overcome that. "When will the report be released?" she asked, her voice hollow. 3 days, maybe 4. But Whitmore already knows what it says. And the moment it's official, he's going to come after you harder than before. There won't be an investigation to worry about anymore. No public scrutiny, just him and his men and nothing to stop them. Lydia looked toward the cabin where Ethan was inside, probably working on the accounts, trying to stretch their dwindling resources through the winter. He'd sacrificed so much for this fight. They both had. And now Catherine was telling her it had all been pointless. "I need to tell Ethan," she said. "Do it quickly, and please, for once, listen to me. Run. Take whatever you can carry and disappear. It's the only way you survive this." Catherine rode away before Lydia could respond, and Lydia stood alone in the cold, the axe heavy in her hands, trying to figure out how to tell Ethan that they'd lost. She found him at the table, surrounded by papers covered in numbers that didn't add up to hope. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him go still. "What is it?" Lydia told him. Everything Catherine had said. Everything it meant. She watched the news land on him like blows, watched his expression cycle through disbelief and anger, and finally settling into something that looked like resignation. "So that's it," he said quietly. "We fought, and we lost. Catherine says we should run." "Of course she does." Ethan pushed the papers away. "Everyone keeps telling us to run, like that's some kind of solution. Maybe it is. Maybe we've been too stubborn to see it." "You want to leave?" He looked at her sharply. "After everything? I want us to survive." Lydia sat down across from him. "And I don't know if we can do that here. Not with Whitmore coming after us and no one to stop him." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. Snow had started falling again, thick and heavy. Where would we even go? West, California maybe, Oregon. Somewhere far enough that Whitmore's reach doesn't extend. And start over with nothing. We've done it before. "You have. I haven't." Ethan's voice was raw. "This ranch is everything I've worked for. Every penny I saved, every hope I had about building something that mattered. It's all here. If I walk away, I'm not just leaving property. I'm admitting that none of it meant anything. Lydia reached across the table and took his hand. It meant something. It means something, but it's not worth dying for. Isn't it? He looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. What's the point of living if you have to keep running from everything that matters? The point is living. We can build something else, somewhere else. We can... I love you. The words stopped Lydia cold. Ethan looked as surprised as she felt, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. But now that it was out, he didn't take it back. I don't know when it happened, he continued, his voice rough. Probably somewhere between you showing up at my ranch with nothing but a trunk full of ruined dreams and you standing up to Whitmore in front of the entire assembly. But I love you, Lydia, and I can't keep watching you suffer because I'm too stubborn to let go of a piece of land. Lydia's throat was tight. Ethan, so if you want to leave, we'll leave, tonight, right now. I'll hitch the wagon, we'll take what we can carry, and we'll go somewhere Whitmore can't touch us. Because losing this ranch hurts, but losing you would destroy me. She was crying, she realized, tears running down her face even though she hadn't noticed them starting. She stood, walked around the table, and pulled him to his feet. Then she kissed him, fierce and desperate, and full of everything she'd been too afraid to admit. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks. Maybe since you gave me a job when you had no reason to trust me. Maybe since you stood beside me at the assembly and didn't flinch. So we're leaving? Lydia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Every instinct screamed that running was smart, that survival mattered more than pride. But another part of her, the part that had crossed a continent on the promise of a fresh start, the part that had learned to split wood and mend fences and stand up to powerful men, rebelled against the idea of letting Whitmore win. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what the right answer is anymore. They held each other in the dimness of the cabin while the snow fell outside and the future hung uncertain between them. The decision was made for them the next morning. Lydia woke to shouting. She bolted upright, disoriented, and heard Dutch's voice outside calling Ethan's name. She dressed quickly and ran to the main room just as Ethan threw open the door. Dutch was there with 2 other ranchers, all of them looking grim. Fire, Dutch said. Big one. Started in the grass about 5 miles east of here and spreading fast. Wind's pushing it this way. Ethan's face went white. How fast? Fast enough that people are evacuating. Half the ranches between here and Iron Gate are in the path. Dutch gestured toward the horizon, and Lydia saw it. A dark smudge against the gray morning sky, smoke rising in a thick column. We're organizing crews to fight it, try to create fire breaks. But we need every able body. How did it start? Lydia asked, though she already knew the answer. Don't know for sure, but there were riders seen in that area last night, and the fire started in 3 different places at once. Dutch's expression was hard. You do the math. Whitmore. Of course it was Whitmore. He couldn't attack them directly with witnesses watching, so he'd found another way. Burn the territory, destroy everyone's property, and let their ranch burn along with the rest. Who could prove it was targeted when the whole region was on fire? We have to help, Ethan said. Are you insane? Lydia grabbed his arm. This is exactly what he wants. While you're out fighting the fire, he'll have free access to the ranch. He'll take everything. If we don't fight the fire, there won't be a ranch left to take. And a lot of innocent people will lose everything. Ethan looked at her. I have to go, Lydia. I have to. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream that helping others wouldn't matter if they lost everything in the process. But she saw the determination in his face and knew nothing she said would change his mind. Then I'm coming with you, she said. No, someone needs to stay here, watch the property. I'm not staying behind while you run into danger. Lydia, we're in this together, remember? That's what we said. She grabbed her coat. So either we both go or we both stay. Choose. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but Dutch interrupted. We don't have time for this. The fire's moving. Either come or don't, but decide now. Ethan swore under his breath. Fine, we both go. But you stay back from the fire line. No arguing. They hitched the wagon and joined the growing convoy heading toward the fire. The closer they got, the worse it looked. Flames stretched across the horizon, consuming everything in their path. Smoke choked the air, and the heat was visible even from a distance, making the air shimmer and warp. Crews were already at work, digging fire breaks, trenches meant to stop the fire's advance by removing fuel. It was brutal work, and everyone knew it might not be enough. Fire this big, pushed by wind, could jump breaks and keep burning. Ethan joined the digging crew while Lydia helped coordinate supplies, water, tools, food for the workers. She kept one eye on the fire, watching it creep closer despite their efforts, and one eye on Ethan, who worked like a man possessed. Hours passed. The fire advanced and retreated, playing games with the wind. They'd stop it in one place only to have it flare up somewhere else. People shouted warnings and encouragement. Someone's barn caught fire, and they had to divert resources to save it. A child went missing and was found hiding in a root cellar, terrified. It was chaos, and through it all, Lydia kept thinking about the ranch sitting empty, vulnerable to whatever Whitmore had planned. Then she saw him. Maxwell Whitmore rode up on his horse, dressed in expensive clothes that were somehow still immaculate despite the smoke and ash. He surveyed the scene with the air of a general reviewing troops, then began directing his own men to help with the fire break. He looked noble, concerned, like a pillar of the community stepping up in a crisis. Lydia wanted to scream. Catherine appeared beside her, soot-streaked and exhausted. He started this, and now he's going to play the hero who helped stop it. No one's going to believe that. Won't they? Catherine gestured at the crews working. Look at them. They're grateful for the help. By tomorrow, the story will be about how Maxwell Whitmore put aside petty disputes to save the territory from disaster. Your accusations will look like the ravings of ungrateful troublemakers. She was right, and Lydia knew it. Whitmore had outmaneuvered them again. He'd created a disaster and positioned himself as the solution, and anyone who questioned him would look petty and vindictive. The fire burned until late afternoon before the wind finally shifted and the crews managed to contain it. By the time it was over, 3 barns had been destroyed, hundreds of acres of pasture burned black, and everyone was exhausted to the bone. But the coal ranch, sitting just outside the fire's path, remained untouched, almost suspiciously untouched. Ethan noticed it too on the ride home. We were right in the path. The wind should have pushed the fire straight over our land. But it didn't, Lydia said quietly. No, it didn't. His hands tightened on the reins, which means either we got incredibly lucky or someone made sure the fire went around us. Why would Whitmore do that? Because burning us out along with everyone else would look coincidental. But if our property was the only one untouched while everyone else is burned, we'd look suspicious, like maybe we had something to do with starting it. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. He's framing us, again. Or setting it up so he can. Give it a few days. Let people start asking questions about why the coal ranch was spared, and then suggest that maybe we started the fire ourselves to deflect from the investigation. Lydia felt sick. That's insane. No one would believe it. People believed we were stealing cattle. People will believe whatever makes sense to them, and right now, we're the convenient explanation for everything that goes wrong. They rode in silence, both thinking the same thing. They couldn't win. No matter what they did, Whitmore stayed ahead of them, turning every action against them, warping reality until truth became unrecognizable. When they reached the ranch, they found it exactly as they'd left it. No damage, no theft, nothing disturbed. It felt like a trap waiting to spring. That night, neither of them could sleep. They sat at the table, exhausted but wired, drinking coffee and staring at nothing. We have to leave, Ethan said finally. Tonight, before Carlson releases his report, before Whitmore makes his next move. We just go. Lydia wanted to agree. Every logical part of her brain screamed that he was right. But something held her back. Not stubbornness exactly, but a deep burning anger at the injustice of it all. He shouldn't get to win, she said. He already has. Not completely, not yet. Lydia leaned forward. What if we didn't run? What if we did something so public, so undeniable that Whitmore couldn't spin his way out of it? Like what? I don't know. But there has to be something. Some way to expose him that doesn't rely on investigations or assemblies or any of the systems he controls. Ethan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Lydia, we're out of options. We've tried everything. We've tried fighting him on his terms. Maybe it's time to change the terms. How? She didn't have an answer, not yet, but as she sat there in the lamplight, watching Ethan's exhausted face and thinking about everything they'd endured, an idea began to form. It was dangerous and probably stupid, but it was the only thing she could think of that might actually work. What if we got him to confess? She said slowly. He's never going to do that. Not publicly, but what if we could get him alone, make him think he'd won, that we were broken? Men like Whitmore love to gloat. They can't help themselves. You want to trick him into admitting what he's done, with witnesses, real ones this time, hidden where he can't see them. Lydia's mind raced. We set it up so he thinks we're surrendering, offer to sell him the ranch for nothing, sign whatever he wants. And when he can't resist rubbing our faces and how he destroyed us, we have people listening, recording everything. Ethan stared at her. That's insane. It's all we've got. It'll never work. He's too smart to fall for something like that. Maybe, but arrogance makes people stupid. And if there's one thing Maxwell Whitmore has in abundance, it's arrogance. Lydia reached across the table and took his hand. We've got nothing to lose, Ethan. If it doesn't work, we leave anyway. But if it does, if we actually pull this off, we end him completely. She could see him turning it over, looking for the flaws. There were plenty. The plan relied on Whitmore's ego overriding his caution, on their ability to act defeated convincingly enough to fool him, on having witnesses he didn't recognize and couldn't intimidate. But it was something, a chance, however slim. All right, Ethan said finally. Let's do it. One last fight, and then we're done. Win or lose, after this we leave and never look back. Lydia nodded, sealing the promise. Win or lose. They spent the rest of the night planning, and by the time dawn broke gray and cold over the Montana frontier, they knew exactly what they had to do. It was reckless and dangerous and probably doomed to fail. But for the first time in weeks, Lydia felt something that almost resembled hope. They set the trap carefully, like hunters who knew their prey was smarter and more dangerous than they were. The message to Whitmore was simple, delivered through Pearson, his ranch manager, 2 days after the fire. Ethan and Lydia wanted to meet, privately. They were ready to discuss terms for selling the property and leaving the territory for good. Pearson had looked skeptical when Ethan handed him the letter in town, his weathered face betraying nothing but doubt. You expect me to believe you're just giving up? Believe what you want, Ethan had said, his voice flat with manufactured defeat. We're done fighting. The investigation's going nowhere. The fire nearly destroyed half the territory, and we're out of money and options. Whitmore wins. We just want enough to start over somewhere else. Lydia had stood beside him, her shoulders slumped, looking every inch the broken woman she needed Whitmore to see. She'd practiced that posture in front of the mirror that morning, defeated, exhausted, hollowed out by loss. It wasn't hard to fake. Most of it was real. Pearson had taken the letter with a grunt that might have been satisfaction or pity. Hard to tell with a man like that. Now they waited. Dutch and Margaret were hidden in the barn loft, positioned where they could hear everything that happened in the main room of the cabin through the gaps in the walls. 2 other ranchers waited in the root cellar beneath the kitchen, accessible through a trapdoor Whitmore wouldn't know existed. Catherine had refused to participate directly. Too risky, she'd said, and Lydia couldn't blame her. But she'd promised to be in town as a failsafe, ready to corroborate what the witnesses heard if it came to that. It was a fragile plan held together by hope and desperation. If Whitmore suspected anything, if he came with armed men instead of coming alone, if he simply refused to engage, any of those things would mean failure. But they were out of better options. The knock came just after noon, 3 sharp raps on the door, confident and commanding. Lydia looked at Ethan, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes, and nodded. He opened the door. Maxwell Whitmore stood on the porch, dressed in a fine suit despite the muddy roads, looking like a man who'd already won and was just here to collect his prize. He was alone, which was either a good sign or meant he was so confident he didn't need backup. Cole? Miss Hale. He nodded to each of them, his expression somewhere between triumph and contempt. I received your message. I'll admit, I was surprised. Surprised we finally saw sense? Ethan stepped back, letting Whitmore enter. Come in. No point discussing this on the porch. Whitmore walked into the cabin like he owned it already, his gaze sweeping over the simple furnishings, the rough-hewn table, the life they'd tried to build. Lydia watched his eyes catalog and dismiss everything he saw, and she had to clench her fist to keep from hitting him. Modest, Whitmore said, settling into a chair without being invited. But I suppose that's what happens when people try to build beyond their station. We're not here to debate our life choices, Lydia said, forcing her voice to stay level. We're here to negotiate. Negotiate? Whitmore smiled. An interesting choice of words, considering you have nothing to negotiate with, but please tell me what you're offering. Ethan sat down across from him, and Lydia remained standing, arms crossed. The ranch, all 160 acres, the cabin, the barn, what's left of the livestock. We'll sign over the deed for enough money to get us to California and start over. How much is enough? $500. Whitmore laughed. You're joking. This property is worth maybe $300 on a good day, and that's before you factor in the damage, the depleted herd, the fact that your reputation is so destroyed no one would buy it anyway. Then make it $300, Ethan said, and Lydia heard the defeat in his voice that wasn't entirely manufactured. We just want out. No. Whitmore leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. See, here's the problem. You two have caused me considerable trouble over the past months. You've made accusations, stirred up resentment, gotten people asking questions they shouldn't be asking, and now you think you can just walk away with a payout? That's not how this works. Then what do you want? Lydia asked. I want you to understand something. Whitmore's voice took on a harder edge. I want you to know exactly what you've lost and why. Because people need to learn that you don't challenge men like me. You don't stand up in front of an assembly and call me a liar. You don't organize your little coalition of failures and try to bring me down. We were just trying to survive, Lydia said quietly. No, you were trying to be something you're not. Whitmore stood, walking to the window to look out over the ranch. You're not a rancher, Cole. You're a hired hand who saved his pennies and bought land he couldn't manage. And you, he turned to Lydia, you're a rejected mail-order bride who was too proud to accept her proper place. Both of you reached above your station, and now you're learning what happens when you do. Ethan's hands clenched on the table. So what? You're not going to buy the ranch? You're just here to gloat? Oh, I'll buy it, but not for $300. Not for any dollars. Whitmore's smile was cold. I'll take it for the cost of the back taxes you owe, which I happen to know you can't pay, plus the debts you've accumulated at the general store, the blacksmith, and various other establishments in Iron Gate. Debts which, coincidentally, I purchased last week. Lydia felt ice in her veins. You own our debts? Every penny, and when you can't pay, which will be in about 3 days when they come due, I'll foreclose. The property becomes mine, you get nothing, and you leave the territory with exactly what you came with. Nothing. That's, Ethan started, legal, perfectly legal. Whitmore walked back to the table. I've made sure of it. My lawyers have checked every detail. There's no loophole, no appeal, no way out. In 3 days, this ranch is mine, and you're both destitute, again. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Lydia fought to keep her expression neutral, to not show the rage and despair warring inside her. This was worse than they'd imagined. Whitmore hadn't just planned to destroy them, he'd crafted a legal trap that would leave them with nothing. Why? Lydia asked, her voice shaking. Why go to all this trouble? You're rich. You've got more land than you could ever use. Why does it matter so much that we have this one small piece? Because you defied me. Whitmore said it simply, like it explained everything. And maybe it did. Because when that stagecoach dropped you at my gates and I sent you away, you should have disappeared, gone back east, found some shopkeeper to marry, accepted that you weren't good enough for a man like me. But instead, you landed here, on Cole's property, and the two of you built something. Not much, but something. And people started talking about how brave you were, how determined. They started looking at you like you mattered. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. I can't have that. I can't have people thinking they can reject my decisions and still thrive. So I didn't just want to take your ranch. I wanted to break you completely, make you an example, and I have. The confession hung in the air. Lydia didn't dare look toward the barn, didn't let her eyes flicker toward the root cellar. But she felt the presence of their hidden witnesses like a physical thing, heard in her mind the sound of every word being memorized, documented, prepared for testimony. He'd done it. Whitmore had actually admitted everything, but Ethan wasn't done. "The fire," he said. "That was you too?" "Can't prove it." Whitmore's smile returned. "But let's say hypothetically that if someone wanted to distract the territory's attention from a failing investigation while simultaneously destroying evidence and making certain troublemakers look suspicious, well, a fire would be an efficient solution. People lost everything in that fire: barns, livestock, pasture. Collateral damage. They'll rebuild. That's what insurance is for." Whitmore stood. "And now, if we're done here, I have business to attend to. Enjoy your last few days on this property. I'll be generous and let you stay until the foreclosure is official." He walked toward the door, and Lydia felt panic rising. They had his confession, but would it be enough? Would anyone believe witnesses hidden in a barn over Maxwell Whitmore's lawyers? "Wait," she said. Whitmore paused, hand on the door. "What?" "I want to know one thing." Lydia moved to stand directly in front of him. "When you rejected me at your gate, when you looked at me like I was livestock that didn't meet your standards, did you know then what you were doing? Did you understand that you were destroying a person's entire life over something as shallow as appearance?" "I understood that you weren't suitable to be Mrs. Maxwell Whitmore. Beyond that, I didn't particularly care what happened to you." His voice was utterly indifferent. "You were a mistake. A mail-order bride who didn't match the photograph her agency sent. The real question is why you didn't have the grace to accept that and disappear quietly." "Because I'm not a thing to be returned when it doesn't suit you." Lydia's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "I'm a person. And every single person you've destroyed, every rancher you've squeezed, every debt you've called in early, every convenient accident and mysterious fire, all of them were people too. People with lives and hopes and dreams that mattered just as much as yours. And yet here we are, me with everything, you with nothing, which suggests that their hopes and dreams didn't matter very much at all." Whitmore opened the door. "That's the way the world works, Miss Hale. The strong take what they want, and the weak make excuses about fairness and justice. You can hate me for understanding that, but it won't change reality." He walked out, letting the door swing closed behind him. They heard his horse's hooves on the frozen ground, the sound fading into the distance. For a long moment, Lydia and Ethan just stood there, not moving, barely breathing. Then Dutch emerged from the barn, and the two ranchers climbed out of the root cellar, and they all stood in the cabin looking at each other with expressions caught between horror and grim satisfaction. "Did you get it all?" Ethan asked. "Every word," Dutch said. "The confession about the fire, the manipulation of your debts, the deliberate destruction of your lives, all of it." Margaret appeared in the doorway, having come down from the loft. "That man is a monster. I knew it before, but hearing him actually say those things..." She shook her head. "He doesn't see people as human. We're all just obstacles or tools to him." "Will it be enough?" Lydia asked. "Can we actually use this?" "We can try," one of the ranchers said. "Get it in front of the assembly again, present it as new evidence." "No!" Catherine Harrow's voice came from the door. She stood on the porch, slightly out of breath like she'd ridden hard. "I'm sorry, but no, it won't work." Lydia's heart sank. "Why not?" Catherine came inside, her usual composure cracked. "I just came from town." Carlson released his report early. "It's exactly what I warned you about. Inconclusive, recommending all charges be dropped, suggesting that both parties have engaged in questionable behavior and should simply move forward." The assembly accepted it unanimously. As far as they're concerned, the matter is settled. "But we have new evidence," Dutch protested. "Evidence obtained through what Whitmore's lawyers will call entrapment. You lured him here under false pretenses, hid witnesses without his knowledge, and recorded a private conversation. They'll argue that anything he said was coerced, that he was simply playing along with what he thought was a negotiation, that he didn't actually admit to anything actionable." Bisbisatitits, Jans. Catherine's expression was pained. I've already heard them preparing the arguments. They're saying Whitmore came here in good faith to help you, and you're trying to frame him because you're bitter about losing. Bapa mitbasal. That's insane, Lydia said. He confessed. You all heard him. We heard a man talking, but words aren't the same as proof. Not legally. Not when he has lawyers who can twist anything into his favor. Catherine looked around at all of them. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but the system isn't going to save you. It never was. The defeat in the room was palpable. Lydia felt it settling over her like a shroud. They'd tried everything: public testimony, documentation, witnesses, even getting Whitmore to confess directly, and none of it mattered. He was too powerful, too connected, too protected by the very structures that were supposed to ensure justice. So what do we do? Ethan asked quietly. No one had an answer. That night, after everyone had left with promises to think of something, anything, Lydia and Ethan sat alone in the cabin. They didn't talk. There wasn't anything left to say. The foreclosure would happen in 3 days, and they had no way to stop it. All their fighting, all their determination, all the courage they'd shown, it amounted to nothing against the simple reality of power. Around midnight, Lydia finally spoke. We should start packing, figure out what we can take with us. Where are we going? I don't know. California, like we talked about. Oregon, maybe. Somewhere. Somewhere. Ethan laughed bitterly. Just somewhere that isn't here. Lydia looked at him. You wanted to stay. Fight to the end. That was before I realized the end was already decided. He stood, walking to the window. I keep thinking about what Whitmore said, about how the strong take what they want and the weak make excuses. And I hate that he's right. He's not right, isn't he? Look at us. We fought as hard as we could, did everything we could think of, and we still lost. Meanwhile, he gets everything he wanted. That's not fairness or justice. That's just power winning. Power only wins if we let it. Lydia stood too, moving to stand beside him. Yes, Whitmore is going to take this ranch. Yes, we're going to lose everything we built. But that doesn't mean he was right. It just means the system is broken. Broken systems don't fix themselves. No, people fix them. Maybe not us, maybe not now, but someone will. Someday, people like Whitmore won't be able to destroy lives without consequences. Someday, the strong won't be able to prey on the weak just because they can. Ethan looked at her. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? They stood together at the window, looking out over the ranch they'd fought so hard to save, knowing they were about to lose it forever. But in the morning, everything changed. Lydia woke to the sound of voices outside. Multiple voices, more than should be there. She dressed quickly and stepped out to find the ranch yard full of people. Dutch and Margaret were there, along with the ranchers who'd served as witnesses. But there were others too, at least 20 people, maybe more, some she recognized from town and many she didn't. They stood in loose groups, talking quietly, waiting. Catherine Harrow stood near the porch, and when she saw Lydia, she walked over. What's happening? Lydia asked. A reckoning. Catherine's voice was steady. I went home last night and couldn't stop thinking about what Whitmore said, about the strong and the weak, about people not mattering, and I realized I was tired. Tired of watching him destroy people, tired of being complicit through my silence, tired of being afraid. Catherine. So I told people what I heard. Not everyone. I couldn't risk that. But I told the ones I trusted, the ones who'd been hurt by Whitmore or seen others hurt, and I told them that if they were tired too, if they wanted to do something, they should come here this morning. Lydia looked at the assembled crowd. What are they here for? To help you stay. Ethan emerged from the cabin, taking in the scene with wide eyes. What's going on? Dutch stepped forward. We took a collection. Everyone here contributed what they could. Money, supplies, labor. It's not much, but it should be enough to cover the debts Whitmore called in. The back taxes, the store bills, all of it. Lydia's throat closed. You did what? We're not letting him win, Margaret said firmly. Not this time. Not when we can actually do something about it. But the money, you can't afford this, any of you. Can't afford not to, one of the ranchers said. Whitmore's been squeezing all of us for years. Individually, we were too weak to fight back. But together? Together, we're stronger than he is. Catherine produced a ledger. I documented every debt he purchased, every amount owed. The total is $473. We raised $520, the extras for supplies to get you through winter. Lydia looked at the numbers, at the names of contributors written in Catherine's neat handwriting, people who barely had enough for themselves giving what they could. A few dollars here, $10 there, 20 from Dutch, who probably couldn't spare it. Each contribution was small, but together they added up to something impossible. Hope. I don't know what to say, Lydia whispered. Don't say anything, Dutch replied. Just take it and keep this place. Show Whitmore that he can't destroy everyone. Ethan was staring at the assembled crowd like he couldn't quite believe they were real. Why would you do this for us? Because you stood up first, an older woman said. Lydia recognized her from town but didn't know her name. Because you went to that assembly and said what we were all too afraid to say, because someone had to, and it was you. And because you're not just fighting for yourselves anymore, Catherine added. You're fighting for everyone Whitmore has ever hurt, everyone he might hurt in the future. That's worth supporting. Lydia felt tears running down her face. She'd been so focused on their own survival, their own battle, that she hadn't understood what it meant to other people. But they'd seen something in her and Ethan's resistance. A possibility that things could be different, that power didn't have to be absolute, that regular people could push back against forces that seemed overwhelming. They'd become symbols without meaning to, and symbols mattered. Thank you, she managed to say. All of you. Thank you. The crowd dispersed slowly, people coming up to shake their hands, to offer words of encouragement, to promise continued support. By midday, the ranch was quiet again, but the money sat on the table, $520 that represented more than currency. It represented community, solidarity, the kind of strength that came from people standing together. That afternoon, Ethan and Lydia rode into Iron Gate and paid every debt Whitmore had purchased. They made sure to do it publicly at each establishment with witnesses present. The shopkeepers looked stunned. The blacksmith actually smiled. Word would spread quickly. The coal ranch wasn't bankrupt. The foreclosure couldn't proceed. Whitmore would know by nightfall that his plan had failed. They were in the general store, paying the last bill, when Sheriff Dawson approached. He looked uncomfortable, his face redder than usual. Cole, Miss Hale, I need to talk to you. Lydia tensed, expecting trouble, but Dawson's expression was more embarrassed than hostile. I've been doing some thinking, he said slowly, about the fire, about everything that's been happening, and I've decided to reopen the investigation into how that fire started. Ethan stared. Your what? There were reports of riders in the area, multiple ignition points, things that didn't add up. Dawson cleared his throat. And I've been hearing things about Mr. Whitmore, things that make me wonder if I've been looking the other way too long. What changed your mind? Lydia asked. Honestly, I heard about what happened this morning, about the whole territory coming together to help you. And I thought, if that many people believe in what you're doing, maybe I should pay better attention. He shifted his weight. Can't promise anything, but I'll look into it properly this time. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had before. Another small crack in Whitmore's armor. The sheriff left, and Lydia turned to Ethan. Do you think it'll matter? Maybe. Even if he doesn't find anything concrete, the fact that he's looking sends a message. Ethan took her hand. Things are changing, slowly, but they're changing. Over the next weeks, that proved true. The investigation into the fire turned up evidence, not enough to charge Whitmore directly, but enough to implicate several of his men. 2 were arrested for arson. Under questioning, one of them admitted to being paid to set the blaze, though he claimed not to know who'd given the order. Everyone knew anyway. Whitmore's reputation began to crack. Business owners started refusing his patronage. Ranchers stopped selling to him. The Territorial Assembly, embarrassed by Carlson's whitewash report, ordered a second investigation into Whitmore's business practices. This one was led by someone from outside the territory, someone who didn't owe Whitmore favors. Whitmore fought back, of course. He filed lawsuits, made counter-accusations, used every legal tool at his disposal, but the tide had turned against him. Too many people had seen him for what he was, and they weren't afraid anymore. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Catherine Harrow published a letter in the territorial newspaper detailing years of abusive behavior she'd witnessed, including the suspicious death of her former fiancé. Other people came forward with similar stories. The volume became impossible to ignore. By spring, Maxwell Whitmore was facing multiple criminal investigations, civil lawsuits, and social exile. His ranch still stood, his money still provided comfort, but his power, the real power that came from fear and control, was broken. He'd won the battle, but lost the war. Lydia and Ethan didn't celebrate when they heard. Victory over Whitmore didn't erase the months of terror and struggle. It didn't restore the hay they'd lost or the sleep they'd missed, or the sense of safety that had been stolen from them. But it did mean they could stop fighting and start actually living. The ranch slowly transformed. With the money from the community and their own determination, they rebuilt better than before. The barn got proper repairs. The herd grew. They bought new equipment, fixed the cabin's roof completely, and even built a small addition, a proper bedroom for Lydia, though she spent most nights in Ethan's. They'd never officially married. There'd been talk of it, vague plans for someday, but the ceremony itself felt less important than the reality they were already living. They were partners in every way that mattered, sharing work, sharing decisions, sharing the quiet moments at the end of exhausting days when they sat together and watched the sun set over land they'd fought to keep. Dutch and Margaret became regular visitors. The coalition that had formed to fight Whitmore evolved into something more permanent, a network of ranchers and business owners who looked out for each other, who refused to let another powerful man terrorize them unopposed. They called themselves the Frontier Alliance, and while the name was a bit grand for what amounted to regular meetings and mutual aid, it represented something important. Regular people realizing they weren't powerless if they stood together. Catherine Harrow left the territory entirely, selling her father's business and moving to San Francisco. She wrote occasionally, letters that spoke of a new life built on her own terms, free from the shadow of men like Whitmore. Lydia wrote back, and their correspondence became a steady reminder that survival sometimes meant knowing when to leave and when to stay. Both choices required courage. One afternoon in late summer, almost a year after everything had started, Lydia stood on the porch watching Ethan work with one of the horses. He'd taken his shirt off in the heat, and sweat gleamed on his shoulders as he moved with the animal in easy harmony. She felt a rush of affection so strong it almost hurt. For this man who'd given her work when she had nothing, who'd fought beside her when the smart choice would have been to cut his losses, who'd learned to open his carefully guarded heart and let her in. He looked up, caught her watching, and smiled. "What?" "Just thinking about how far we've come." "Yeah?" He walked over, leading the horse. From where to where? From two people alone and afraid to two people who have a home, who have each other. She paused. Who matter to more than just themselves? Ethan tied the horse to the rail and climbed the porch steps to stand beside her. "You regret any of it? The fighting, the fear, all of it?" Lydia considered the question honestly. There were moments she'd never want to relive, the barn fires, the threats, the crushing certainty that they were going to lose everything. But those moments had also revealed something she'd never known about herself. She was stronger than she'd imagined, braver, more resilient, and she wasn't alone anymore. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. It was hard, and I wouldn't want to do it again. But it made me who I am. It made us who we are." Who are we? Survivors, fighters, people who don't quit when things get impossible. She leaned against him. People who understand that sometimes the only way to build something worth having is to refuse to let anyone take it away. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's a lot of weight to carry." "Good thing we're carrying it together." They stood there as the sun moved lower in the sky, painting everything gold and amber. The ranch spread out before them, imperfect, hard-won, theirs. Cattle grazed in the pasture. The barn stood solid and whole. The garden Lydia had planted was flourishing, green rows promising a harvest. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined when they started. It was better because it was real, built by their own hands and determination, defended against forces that should have destroyed it. That night, Ethan proposed. Not with a ring, they didn't have money for luxuries like that, but with words that were simple and true. "I want this to be permanent," he said as they sat by the fire after dinner. "Not just living together because it's convenient, but actually married, actually committed, if that's something you want too." Lydia felt her heart swell. "Yes, it's what I want. Even knowing what being married to me means, this ranch, this life, it's never going to be easy. We'll always be working, always fighting to keep what we have. I know. And yes, even knowing that, especially knowing that." She took his hand. "I didn't come west looking for easy. I came looking for real. And this, this place, this life we're building, it's the most real thing I've ever had." They married a week later in a simple ceremony at Dutch's ranch with their coalition of friends as witnesses. Margaret cried. Dutch gave a toast about stubbornness and love being two sides of the same coin. Catherine sent a telegram of congratulations from San Francisco. Even Sheriff Dawson showed up, looking embarrassed but sincere in his good wishes. It wasn't grand or elegant. The ceremony was performed by a circuit preacher who mispronounced both their names. Lydia wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric bought with egg money. Ethan's suit was the same one he'd worn to the assembly, still too tight across the shoulders. But when they said their vows, to stand together through hardship, to build together, to fight for each other and the life they'd chosen, every word rang true. After the ceremony, as they rode back to the ranch in the wagon, Lydia thought about the woman who'd stood at Maxwell Whitmore's gate less than 2 years ago. That woman had been broken by rejection, terrified of the future, desperate for any opportunity. She barely recognized her now. The woman she'd become was harder, tougher, worn by struggle, but not defeated by it. She'd learned that survival required more than just endurance. It required the willingness to fight back, to demand more than the scraps powerful people were willing to throw. She'd learned that community mattered more than individual strength, that standing together transformed what was possible. Most importantly, she'd learned that worth wasn't something given by others, not by wealthy ranchers or mail-order marriage agencies or anyone else. Worth was something you claimed for yourself, proved through action, defended against anyone who tried to take it away. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked as they pulled up to the cabin. "About how Maxwell Whitmore thought he was teaching us our place." "Me is beestating," Lydia climbed down from the wagon. "About how he was right that the strong take what they want. He just didn't understand that strength comes in different forms." "You think he learned that lesson?" "Probably not. Men like him rarely do." She looked at the cabin, their home, standing solid in the fading light. But everyone else learned it, and that's what matters. The months after the wedding were quiet in the best possible way. They worked the ranch, improved the property, and slowly built up savings. The territory had changed too. Whitmore still lived in his mansion, but his influence had withered. New families moved in, drawn by stories of a community that stood together. The Frontier Alliance grew, became a real force in territorial politics. When the next assembly met, they elected new representatives, people who'd lived through Whitmore's reign and were determined it would never happen again. Laws changed, protections strengthened. It was slow, imperfect progress, but it was progress. 2 years after everything started, Lydia stood in the same spot where the stagecoach had left her, looking up at the iron gates of the Whitmore estate. She wasn't alone this time. Ethan stood beside her, and their 6-month-old daughter slept in a sling against Lydia's chest. The gates were rusted now, paint peeling. The ranch beyond showed signs of neglect, overgrown paths, sagging fences, windows dark. Whitmore had left the territory months ago, driven out by scandal and lawsuits. The property sat empty, a monument to the impermanence of power. "Feels like a lifetime ago," Lydia said quietly. "It was a lifetime ago. We're different people now." "Better people?" "Stronger, anyway. Whether that's better, I don't know." Ethan looked at their daughter, his expression soft. "But yeah, probably better." Lydia thought about that, about the cost of becoming who they were, about the price of fighting and winning. They'd lost sleep, money, peace of mind. They'd learned what fear tasted like, what it meant to stare down forces larger than themselves. They bore scars, physical and otherwise, from their battles. But they'd also found each other, found community, found purpose beyond simple survival. "Do you think she'll understand?" Lydia asked, nodding toward their sleeping daughter. "When she's older, when we tell her about all this? I think she'll grow up knowing that when bad things happen, you fight back. That power isn't permanent unless people let it be. That regular folks can change things if they're willing to stand together." Ethan touched the baby's head gently. "That's not a bad lesson to learn." "No, it's not." They turned away from the gates and walked back to their wagon. Behind them, the Whitmore estate slowly crumbled, another piece of history being reclaimed by the land. Ahead, their ranch waited, home, purpose, proof that sometimes the rejected and discarded could build something that lasted. That night, after they'd put the baby down and finished the evening chores, Lydia and Ethan sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cool, promising autumn, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled its lonely song. "You ever wonder what would have happened if Whitmore had accepted you?" Ethan asked. "If he'd actually married you like he planned?" Lydia shuddered. "I'd be miserable. Probably dead inside, if not actually dead, pretending to be someone I'm not for the rest of my life." So getting rejected was the best thing that could have happened. In a twisted way, yes, though I wouldn't have believed that at the time. She leaned against him. "What about you? What if you'd never stopped that day? Never offered me work? I'd still be alone, still struggling, probably would have lost the ranch eventually because I couldn't keep up with everything myself." He was quiet for a moment. "You saved my life as much as I saved yours. We saved each other." "Yeah, we did." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other deliberately every day since. The ranch around them was quiet, peaceful, everything they'd fought to preserve. And in that moment, Lydia understood something fundamental about the human spirit. People were resilient beyond measure. They could survive rejection, loss, poverty, terror. They could face down power and prejudice and forces designed to break them. Not because they were special or blessed or destined for greatness, but because they were stubborn and determined and unwilling to accept that the world had to be the way it was. Change was possible. Not easy, not quick, not without cost, but possible. That was the lesson she'd learned on this harsh frontier, in this unforgiving land through months of struggle and fear. And it was the lesson she'd pass on to her daughter, not through words, but through the example of a life lived on her own terms, defended against anyone who tried to dictate otherwise. The future was uncertain. There would be more struggles, more challenges, moments when everything felt impossible again. But Lydia wasn't afraid anymore. She'd learned that impossible just meant difficult, that defeat was only permanent if you accepted it, that the weak could become strong when they stood together. She'd been thrown away like garbage and had built a life anyway, had fought power and won, had taken rejection and transformed it into redemption. And standing there on the porch of the ranch she'd defended, with the man she loved beside her and their daughter sleeping peacefully inside, Lydia Hale, no longer discarded, no longer powerless, no longer defined by anyone's judgment but her own, knew exactly who she was. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd claimed her place in the world and refused to let anyone take it away. She was free. And that freedom, hard-won and fiercely defended, was worth everything it had cost. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions. The mountains stood eternal on the horizon. And beneath that vast Montana sky, two people who should have been crushed built their future one stubborn day at a time, proving that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies, but in refusing to let them define you. The ranch would stand for generations. Their children would work this land, and their children's children after them. And they would know the story of how it began, not with money or privilege or luck, but with two people who had nothing except determination and each other. That was enough. It had always been enough.